The 75th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. The General Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 63 entitled Use of the Veto. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Mr. President, nearly 7 months of devastating conflict have brought about a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and an increasing volatile atmosphere in the region. Tens of thousands have been killed or wounded. Most of the population is displaced, and there is a continued risk of famine. Although the Security Council adopted the resolution in March demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, it has sadly not come to fruition. We are grateful for the intense ongoing diplomatic efforts, especially by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, to bring about the cessation of hostilities and the release of all hostages, and hoping they will be realized soon. Still, much more needs to be done to achieve a lasting peace. Mr. President, we consistently hear calls for a two-state solution in this August Assembly. Japan has strongly upheld the Palestinian right to self-determination through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security with Israel. Back in 2012, Japan voted in favor of the 2012 General Assembly resolution granting Palestine the status of non-members observer state at the United Nations. After 12 years since then, Japan last month voted in favor of the draft Security Council resolution as to Palestine's full UN membership as a comprehensive decision, recognizing that Palestine meets the criteria for admission, while also taking into account the perspective of promoting the establishment of a Palestinian state through peaceful negotiation between the parties concerned. Japan will remain committed, working with fellows in the Council and beyond, to bring peace, security, and stability to the region and realize the vision of the two-state solution at last. In the meantime, the international community must continue to exert all our efforts to achieve a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza as soon as possible, with all hostages released and the humanitarian supplies brought in. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan, and now I give floor to the distinguished representative of Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, we have witnessed again another hypocrisy, double standard, and high-handedness in favor of the United States at the UN Security Council. Since the outbreak of the conflict between Hamas and Israel, the United States exercised its veto power for 5 times on the important resolutions related to the safety and prosperity of Palestinian people, including the casting veto, the application by Palestine for full membership at the United Nations. By exercising its veto power, the United States has demonstrated its true color and attitude toward the issue of the lasting peace and security in the Middle East, as well as resolving the Palestine issues. The United States insists that they vote against the resolution on the admission of the new members because application by Palestine does not meet criteria for membership as set forth in the UN Charter. These claims are clear violation of the principal purpose of the UN Charter, which stipulates that appropriate measures should be taken to develop friendly relations among nations and strengthen universal peace based on the respect for principle of equal rights and the self-determination of people. The right to self-determination is a fundamental principle of the international law and treaties, including UN Charter. According to this principle, all people and nations have a right to fully determine their own political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The right to self-determination must be applied to the Palestinian people without exemption. What is more unacceptable is that the United States claimed the admission of the Palestine as a full UN membership can only come from direct negotiation with Israel. Independence with statehood is an undeniable national right of Palestinian people. This legitimate right and aspiration of Palestinian people cannot be subject to the negotiation. Furthermore, admission of Palestine as a full UN membership is not a gift to be given as a result of the negotiation with Israel. As of today, 140 UN member states have recognized Palestine as independent state. Such a significant international recognition of Palestinian statehood clearly demonstrates that Palestine is deserved to be full members of the United Nations. The PRK delegation strongly supports Palestine's full UN membership and their just struggle to regain their legitimate national rights, including establishment of an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this important meeting. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Indonesia challenged the Security Council to stand on the right side of history. Yet once again, we reconvene in this hall to reflect on the use of veto, this time against recommending the full membership of the State of Palestine to the UN. A single raise of hand has dismissed the other 142 countries who have recognized the State of Palestine. Perhaps more importantly, a single raise of hand has dismissed a nation's inalienable right to justice and equality. Once again, we are faced with the same question. Was the veto just? Was it accountable? Or is it, in fact, not only unjust, but an antiquated privilege? The answer seems to be crystal clear. Mr. President, allow me to underline 2 points. First, the State of Palestine deserves full membership of the UN. It is key to advance the two-state solution. It is key to rectify injustices that Palestinians have endured for decades, including the current catastrophe in Gaza. Second, our meeting today must go beyond discussing the abuse of the veto. We must go beyond making repetitive loops over and over. Instead, it must be a catalyst for further action, to restore the Council's credibility and to further empower the General Assembly. Each and every one of us, the UN member states, have the obligation to maintain international peace and security under the UN Charter. In this regard, Indonesia supports the measures taken by the Arab Group, OIC, and the non-aligned movement requesting the President of the General Assembly to convene an emergency special session. And we are heartened to note that the President has scheduled the special session to take place in the immediate future. We call upon this August Assembly to make firm recommendation for collective measures, hence sending a clear message that the denial of basic rights and dignity of the Palestinian people cannot be tolerated. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. And now I give floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Thank you, President. New Zealand has actively supported the veto initiative from its inception, and we remain a proud proponent of Resolution 76/262. This resolution created a mechanism to ensure accountability between UN organs in accordance with the Charter, and to ask permanent members of the Security Council that have cast a veto to explain themselves to the wider UN membership. New Zealand believes the veto is fundamentally undemocratic in its nature. We are therefore disappointed in any use of the veto, whether it is in the process of admitting new members to the UN or in situations where the Council has a responsibility to maintain international peace and security. It is important to recognise the context in which this veto was cast. In New Zealand's case, we support the establishment of a Palestinian state as an expression of the fundamental right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. We have done so for decades. For us, it is a matter of when, not if, we see a Palestinian state alongside the State of Israel. Serious negotiations are needed to see genuine progress on the two-state solution. Action to revive the Middle East peace process is critical, and we will continue to call on the parties to return to the negotiating table urgently in an effort to work towards a two-state solution. President, it is critical that we do not lose focus on the current crisis. Civilians are experiencing extreme suffering as this war continues. Israel needs to do more to meet its obligations under international humanitarian law. It must facilitate rapid, safe and unimpeded humanitarian access into Gaza, including fully cooperating with the United Nations to provide food, medicine and other aid and basic services. The need remains for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, urgent de-escalation and the delivery of critically needed humanitarian aid. This must be our immediate priority. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand. I now give floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
President, Excellencies, Malta expresses its disappointment in the necessity to convene following the veto cast at the Security Council on 18 April. Malta voted in favor of the draft Security Council resolution presented by Algeria, recommending full membership of Palestine in the United Nations. We express our regret that the veto hindered the Security Council from reaching a recommendation. Malta's vote was one aimed at seeking to advance peace to the two-state solution. This remains the only realistic foundation for sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East. We voted in favor of a solution that has garnered the long-standing support of the majority of the international community for decades. Malta supports Palestine's full membership in the United Nations and believes that it meets all the requirements set out in Article 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. Moreover, it is crucial to emphasize that only through the realization of a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine coexisting peacefully and securely, can we envision a genuine prospect for peace, not only in the region, but also throughout the broader Middle East. Full membership within the UN would have offered a beacon of hope during a period fraught with considerable turmoil and uncertainty. President, Malta reaffirms its position that an immediate and permanent ceasefire is the only avenue through which we can prevent further deterioration and begin addressing the catastrophic impact of this war, which has led to the deaths of over 35,000 people, the majority of whom are women and children. We underline that a ceasefire would also be conducive to the immediate and urgent release of all hostages, who have now been held by Hamas and other groups for over 200 days. We strongly reiterate our full condemnation of the 7 October terror attacks by Hamas and other armed groups, including the taking of hostages and the continued rocket fire at Israeli population centers. We are deeply concerned and alarmed at the prospect of an Israeli ground invasion in Rafah. Such a military action in Rafah, where over 1 million internally displaced civilians are currently residing and facing the threat of famine, would be utterly unjustifiable. We reiterate that all Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 2728, 2720, and 2712, must be respected and implemented by all parties. The provisional orders of the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March must be complied with. Furthermore, international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties. We especially recall the international humanitarian law obligations of all parties to protect civilians and humanitarian workers. In conclusion, President, Malta underlines its steadfast commitment to the realization of a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation aligns itself to the statement delivered on behalf of the Arab group and the non-aligned movement. We make the following in our national capacity. This meeting is held following the use by the United States of the veto against the draft resolution tabled by sisterly Algeria at the Security Council to grant Palestine full membership at the United Nations. The Algerian draft resolution was supported by more than 150 states from the Arab group, the OIC, and the non-aligned movement, as well as from other states that support the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people and their inalienable rights to establish their independent state with full membership at the United Nations. The use by the U.S. administration of the veto against this draft resolution, once again, shows that the U.S. administration does not really care about international law, the purposes and principles of the Charter, and the will of member states. We condemn the use of the veto by the United States 5 times during a few months to provide political covering and immunity and unconditional support to the Israeli occupation authorities to prevent the Security Council from carrying out its mandate, namely the maintenance of international peace and security, and to empower war criminals from the occupation to continue their genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people, as they continue their efforts to escalate the situation in the region, to threaten international peace and security by conducting repeated aggressions on the Syrian territories and other states in the region. Mr. President, we reaffirm our support to the Palestinian people in their fight to liberate their land, to establish an independent state with Jerusalem as a capital, to be granted full membership at the United Nations. We stress the need to immediately end the Israeli aggression and ensure the delivery of humanitarian assistance to people of Gaza and to prevent their displacement. We warn against the repercussions of the repeated Israeli attacks on the states of the region, which threaten regional and international peace and security. We call upon the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities, take immediate action to stop these attacks and ensure they are not repeated, and to ensure that occupation authorities are held accountable. Thank you, Mr. President.
The distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
President, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is now in its 7th decade. Generations of Palestinian people have lost their homes and lived in displacement. This is an open wound on the conscience of humanity. The establishment of an independent state is the long aspiration of the Palestinian people. Formal membership in the United Nations is a crucial step in this historical process. With its veto, the United States has mercilessly shattered the decades-long dream of the Palestinian people. For China, this is deeply disappointing. Palestine formally submitted its application as early as in 2011. However, due to the opposition of some countries, the Council's action was put on hold at that time. During the past 13 years, the political prospects of the two-state solution have continued to be eroded and damaged, while the suffering of the Palestinian people worsened. Under such circumstances, accepting Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations so that it can enjoy equal status with Israel and providing international guarantee for the implementation of the two-state solution is an urgent responsibility that the international community must not shy away from. President, on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the United States has used its veto dozens of times. Since the outbreak of the current conflict in Gaza, the United States has used its veto 5 times, 4 of which to block the ceasefire in Gaza, and this time to single-handedly block Palestine's formal admission to the United Nations. Showing intransigence based on its own interests and geopolitical calculations, the United States has repeatedly resorted to veto in an abusive manner, which is not commensurate with the role of a responsible power. We hope that the United States will truly uphold an objective and impartial position, join the international community's action for justice, so as to play a constructive role that is expected of it in stopping the war and alleviating the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. President, the war in Gaza is still ongoing, creating an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. We urge Israel to immediately cease all military operations, abandon its plan of attack on Rafah, immediately open all land crossings, guarantee rapid, safe, and large-scale humanitarian access, and provide necessary facilitation for the transportation and distribution of relief supplies by the UN humanitarian agencies. The implementation of the two-state solution is the fundamental way out of the Middle East problem. China calls for greater international diplomatic efforts to revitalize the political prospects of the two-state solution. China supports the early reconsideration by the Security Council of Palestine's application for full membership in the UN and hopes that individual countries will cease setting up obstacles to that end. China will continue to work with all parties to achieve the goal of a comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine, the peaceful coexistence between Palestine and Israel, and the lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Mr. President, we join in this statement made by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement countries. Mr. President, when the United Nations approved the partition of Palestine in 1947, that plan created 2 states, one Arab and one Jewish. The State of Israel was created in 1948, but the Arab state for the Palestinians was not. The Palestinians were not consulted on the stripping of their territory to create Israel, and they were put off with the promise of a national state, which never came. A free and sovereign Palestine state is contrary to the plans of annexation that Israel is currently implementing on the ground. For over 75 years, Israel has refused to recognize the existence of the Palestinian people as a nation with political rights and claims to have the right to veto through the United States to veto the existence of the Palestinian state. This de facto veto is a perverse incentive to continue with its plans of settlement expansion. Mr. President, Israel believes it's above the law and its behavior knows no bounds because it has the support of the Western powers led by the government of the United States. This framework of impunity has convinced Israel that it has a free pass in order to unleash a wave of violence using the strategy of covering one crime with another crime that's even greater. Even yesterday, just yesterday, the Prime Minister of Israel announced that they will attack the city of Rafah in Gaza, regardless of whether or not an agreement is reached for a ceasefire. The leaders of the Israeli regime do not hide their plans. They're proud of their atrocities, and they state loud and clearly their intention to redouble the massacres. Their disdain for international law is clear when, in partnership with the United States, Israel is implementing a campaign of coercion vis-a-vis the International Criminal Court to prevent it from investigating, as is its duty, investigating the genocide currently taking place in Gaza. From there, we cannot expect any action from Israel that would correct the current situation. Today, Israel is the most dangerous regime in the region because its recent history has convinced it that war consolidates its oppression over the Palestinian people. It's time to say to the world that a criminal state such as Israel has lost its capacity to prevent the recognition of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. Mr. President, for all the aforementioned reasons, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela would like to indicate its support for the members of the Security Council that voted on 18 February in favor of the draft resolution recommending to the General Assembly the admission of Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations. It's a demonstration of the Palestinian people's right to freedom, self-determination, and independence. It's an act of decolonization to correct an injustice which should be a source of shame to us all. Unfortunately, in this historic vote, only the veto of the United States denied the Palestinians their approval as a full member state with full rights in the United Nations. Never had there been a vote which had been vetoed by opposition by the United States. It's clear now to the world that the main country which is the main obstacle to freedom of the Palestinian people and peace in the Middle East is the United States. The United States is the only country with the power, the real power, to control the criminal conduct of Israel. And that's why it should stop and overcome its addiction to war. It's necessary to put an end to the fiction that Israel can violate international law without support of its sponsor. If the United States does not take action in a responsible and rational manner under its international obligation as required by the current situation, it's running the risk that Israel will drag it into a conflict of even greater proportions. It's necessary for the United States to show its willingness to make a two-state solution a reality and that it fulfill its own words and international law. It's time to pay the historical debt of the partition plan of Palestine approved by the United States in this General Assembly 77 years ago. Thank you very much, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you also for convening this meeting. And first and foremost, I would like to commend the diplomatic efforts of Liechtenstein, which led to the initiative for this veto, without which we would not be able to express ourselves today. Indeed, this initiative stems from Resolution 76/262, which is now 2 years old. Just a few days ago was its anniversary, and it strengthens transparency and responsibility for the exercise of the right of veto within the Security Council. Andorra is deeply attached to the good functioning of the United Nations and recommends multilateralism which is effective and inclusive, and that would then create a way to face the many crises of the world. It is thus key that the Security Council, the main responsibility of which is to maintain international peace and security, be able to find a consensus as necessary to act effectively. Mr. President, the Principality of Andorra has, with great concern, followed the situation in the Middle East, especially in Gaza. We once again, with the greatest firmness, condemn the terrorist attacks perpetrated against Israel on the 7th of October 2023. We deeply regret the very high number of civilian victims to date, the enormous impact on women and children, and we regret the impact on humanitarian workers of UNRWA and other agencies and entities, people who have paid with their lives for this service. The deplorable situation of civilians living in the Gaza Strip, especially conditions for women, children, and senior citizens, is worsening every day that passes. Once again, we demand an immediate ceasefire of hostilities and respect of international humanitarian law. We also will continue demanding an immediate and lasting ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. As to the ceasefire, we have seen how, when there's a will, progress can be made, and therefore we commend the meticulous work of the E10 that allowed and created the adoption of the Resolution 278 of the Security Council. However, we must continue to shoulder our responsibilities, and we regret that a binding resolution was not implemented. In this regard, Andorra once again regrets and calls upon all involved parties to begin an active dialogue, because it's the only path to lasting peace in the region. We also regret that the Security Council resolution, which should have recommended providing the status of full member state to Palestine in the United Nations, was not successful. Palestine made its first request in 2011, and it was allowed to take the condition of observer state and not member in 2012. However, that's not enough. We must meet their aspirations, since these aspirations are fully in line with the principles and charters as set forth in the UN Charter, and that all member states defend and adhere to. As a result, Andorra is in favor of admitting Palestine as a full-fledged member. Mr. President, lasting peace can only be achieved from a place of inclusion and not one of exclusion. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
السيد الرئيس.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to you for holding this important session. The Kingdom of Jordan also supports the statement of the Arab Group, and we would like to make this statement in our national capacity. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this meeting is being held because the Security Council has recently failed to adopt a draft resolution submitted by the Popular Democratic Republic of Algeria in the Security Council. In that resolution, there was a request for granting Palestine full membership in the United Nations. The resolution was not passed because a permanent member of the Security Council of the United States exercised the veto against the draft resolution. Jordan here expresses its extreme regret that the Security Council was unable to implement its own resolutions on the two-state solution in a manner that upholds the rights of the Palestinian people, the legitimate rights of those Palestinian people, especially the right to liberty, state, and self-determination. Jordan reiterates that recognizing the state of Palestine and its full membership in the United Nations has become an urgent necessity and a moral imperative for the international community, especially as Israel continues to kill any chance for a just and comprehensive peace, either through its continued violations and illegal measures in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, or through its continued barbaric war on the Gaza Strip. A war that, since it started 7 months ago, has killed more than 34,000 Palestinian martyrs, most of whom were unarmed women and children. Here, Jordan reiterates its call for a stop to the Israeli aggression on Gaza immediately, and we call for allowing for the sustainable, urgent, and immediate delivery of humanitarian aid unimpeded. And we condemn in the strongest of terms the attacks that Israeli settlers have launched this morning on the Jordanian aid convoy laden with basic humanitarian supplies and that were headed to Gaza through the Karam Abu Salim process. The second convoy was through the Beit Hanun crossing point. We note that Israel's failure to provide protection to aid convoys and allowing them to be attacked is a blatant violation of its legal obligations as the occupying power. Mr. President, Jordan warns of the dangerous repercussions that may arise from Israel, the occupying powers' continued deprivation of the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, especially in light of the great support in the international community for the establishment of the Palestinian state on Palestinian soil and on the two-state solution. We call upon the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities by preventing Israel from dragging the entire region into more conflict, into more tension, and into more war through its continued unjust aggression on Gaza and denial of the Palestinian people's legitimate rights, and through its continued undermining of the chances for a just and comprehensive peace. In closing, we reiterate the centrality of ending Israeli occupation and establishing an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital within the 4 June 1967 lines and in accordance with international legitimacy resolutions, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Jordan. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
I thank you, Mr. President. First, we'd like to thank the President of the General Assembly for holding this meeting in accordance with GA resolutions 76/262. The Kingdom of Morocco, led by King Mohammed VI, as the Jerusalem Committee, and accords great importance to the Palestinian issue and remains convinced of its centrality in the Middle East region, and we consider that a resolution to the Palestinian question is the source of stability and peace in the region. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its full support for the Palestinian people's legitimate rights that are based on international legitimacy and are based on the two-state solution that has been agreed upon by the international community and which would lead to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the 4 June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. The Kingdom of Morocco calls for launching a genuine peace process that would lead to this resolution. Palestine's membership in the United Nations, its full membership in the United Nations, has become an urgent priority as it is part of the two-state solution agreed upon by all. Therefore, the Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its strong support for the request to grant Palestine full membership in the United Nations because we are convinced that granting its membership will bolster the chances of achieving peace in the region. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its rejection of any measures that would undermine the legal and historic status of Al-Quds al-Sharif and its holy sites, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or the imposition of any restrictions on the entry of worshippers to the mosque. We reiterate the need to maintain its civilizational and Islamic character and avoid any form of provocation and escalation. The Al-Quds Committee, which is chaired by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, continues to play its practical and political role to support the Palestinian people in general and Jerusalemites in particular, and we continue to work politically and in the field under the personal supervision of His Majesty the King. Mr. President, the humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip that has lasted for over 6 months threatens international and regional peace and security and have repercussions on the entire world. Israeli military actions in the Gaza Strip have exposed extreme violations that are not in line with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The victims of this crisis have reached unimaginable levels, not to mention starvation and famine and the targeting of humanitarian workers in a violation of international laws and human values. The Kingdom of Morocco once again calls for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and calls for the protection of civilians in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law. We call for allowing access to humanitarian aid adequately and unimpeded to the Gaza Strip and the release of all detainees and establishing a political horizon for the Palestinian question. We also call for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2712 and 2720 and 2728. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco reiterates that it rejects any threats to expand the scope of military operations to cover all the areas in Gaza, including Rafah, because this could lead to an escalation of matters and a deepening of the humanitarian crisis there. We also reiterate the need to empower our Palestinian people in Gaza by allowing them access to humanitarian aid in a manner that would reach them safely and adequately and with no impediments. This is something that the Kingdom of Morocco supports continuously since the crisis started in implementation of the royal instructions of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the chairman of the Al-Quds Committee. We reiterate the important and basic role that UNRWA plays in providing services to Palestinian refugees. And we stress the need to support the UNRWA with all the necessary and adequate resources to allow it to perform its noble tasks. In closing, Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco continues to uphold the option of peace, and we will continue to work towards any international effort that aims to relaunch dialogue and negotiations to arrive at a just and comprehensive solution that would guarantee to the Palestinian people all their rights, namely the right to an independent state that is sovereign with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
Mr. President, we thank you for convening this session. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by United Arab Emirates on behalf of the Arab Group and the statement on behalf of non-aligned movement. It is disappointing that the veto was used against a draft resolution submitted to the Security Council by Algeria on behalf of the Arab Group, a draft resolution that embodied the well-deserved aspirations of the Palestinian people in obtaining full membership at the UN. The Palestinian people who have been suffering for decades of injustice and marginalization as a result of the arbitrary measures and discriminatory policies of the Israeli occupation authorities, including the privation of their right to self-determination and independence. We highly appreciate the historic position of peace-loving member states of the Security Council who voted in favor of the rights of the Palestinian people and in favor on granting full membership to the State of Palestine. It is regrettable that the Security Council fails yet again in supporting the rights of the Palestinian inalienable rights after repeated failure to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire to stop the genocide and the bloodbath in Gaza, all of which constitute a disgrace to the Security Council and the humanity as a whole. Mr. President, it is unacceptable for the Security Council to remain hostage of political calculations and narrow interests that disregard the demands of more than 140 countries who recognize the State of Palestine. Recognition continued by other member states. They disregard the human and legal right to self-determination and the two-state solution in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions, the latest of which was Resolution 2334, and the GA Resolutions 181 and 194, all of which have provided for the implementation of the two-state solution for the Palestinian people to obtain their inalienable rights and establish their independent sovereign state on the 4 of June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. This encourages the Israeli occupation state to continue committing brutal crimes and daily massacres against Palestinian civilians, the majority of whom are children and women, in a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law, the international law of human rights, as well as all international conventions. Israelis' occupation that prevents the delivery of humanitarian aid and seeks to forcibly displace Palestinians. Israeli occupation forces are even preparing for a ground invasion on Rafah, the last resort for more than 1.5 million Palestinian displaced Palestinians. This will constitute an unacceptable humanitarian disaster because Israel, the occupying power, knows that the Security Council stands paralyzed and unable to stop its war, its crimes, its brutal violations against the Palestinian people, or to hold the perpetrators accountable. At a time when we renew our rejection of the policy of bias and covering up for the Israeli occupation plans, providing protection for these authorities at the account of more than 35,000 people killed and more than 75,000 people injured, the majority of whom are women and children over the past 5 months in Gaza, we also reject the double standards that prolong this conflict in view of an ultimate failure, total failure in implementing any related resolutions for the last 75 years. We call for full implementation of Security Council resolutions 2712, 2720, and Resolution 2728. In conclusion, Mr. President, we reiterate that we, alongside with all peace-loving countries and nations, will continue to mobilize at all levels in all forums until the time when the State of Palestine obtains full membership of the UN in line with international resolutions, the Arab Peace Initiative, and until that time when the Security Council assumes its mandated responsibility, and until a permanent and immediate ceasefire is in place, allowing the delivery of all humanitarian aid into Gaza Strip without any obstacles, and the stopping of the forced displacement policies against the Palestinian people, providing Palestinians with international protection in all the occupied Palestinian territories, holding Israel accountable for all its crimes against Palestinians. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Yemen, and now I give floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.